Warnings from global energy experts are raising fresh concerns about the impact of the Middle East conflict on air travel, with suggestions Europe could have just 6 weeks or so of jet fuel supplies left if disruption continues. It's a scenario that could lead to flight cancellations, rising fares and wider economic fallout. So to discuss what this could mean for our aviation sector, I'm joined on the line now by Eoghan Corry, the travel expert and editor of Air and Travel magazine. Eoghan, good to talk to you. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning, and first generation Clareman. You'll be glad to hear I had a lovely drive from Ballyvaughan to Spanish Point yesterday in that gorgeous sunshine, because it always shines. The sun always shines at West Clare.
I'm not so sure about that if you've been here since the start of the year, but we'll go with that line anyway, Eoghan. How I suppose likely is that line? I mean, some people might listen to that and say, when they hear Europe has potentially 6 weeks of jet fuel left, and say, that's hyperbole. But with everything that's happening in the Middle East, the Straits of Hormuz, how critical is that to global aviation fuel supply? And what element of hyperbole is involved in this, do you think?
As with many of the stories, and you've just put your finger on it, it's partly true. It's not totally true that Europe is facing a crisis. It's slightly different. Europe wouldn't have more than 6 weeks supply most times. It's sort of normal in the world we live in that you have a fairly short run in between delivery, because people don't pay for storage and all that stuff anymore. Now, Asia, Australia have already run into the problem, but Europe, there's a load of reasons to be cheerful. One of them is that we get a lot of our oil elsewhere. America is a big source. Venezuela is a big source for us, particularly in Spain, where a lot of the refining capacity is. Norway is a big source within Europe. So all of that's happening in the background. And the messaging that came last week was all about what you do with if things really hit a big crisis. And the messaging was for the European Union saying, we really need contingency in here. But as it stands, the airlines are not worried. The airports are telling us they're not worried. And this will impact on the airports rather than the airlines.
And how quickly do airlines typically react to a crisis or potential crisis of this nature?
Airports will have their supplies. It's not that you have 100% of your supply arranged for the year, but they have their supply chains and they keep an eye on them. We already ran into a little bit of a problem with some of the regional airports, the smaller airports in Italy. But this is important, and this is where it impacts on the passenger, is that if the airlines are told by the airport, we have a fuel issue, they won't say we're closing down. They'll say you can get 80% of what you normally get. And then airlines start thinking. They put in an extra fuel stop. Some of your listeners would have flown from, for instance, Santorini, a very famous Greek island, and you stop in Thessalonica on the way because of a wait listing on the takeoffs from Santorini. It happens a lot that airlines have to cope. And oddly enough, this is a big crisis, a big worldwide crisis, but most of what airlines cope with are smaller things like weather events, strikes. The air traffic control strikes cause thousands of diversions. If this happens, and this is a possibility, not a probability, if this happens, that's what airlines will do. The passengers will barely even notice. Maybe you'll have a fuel stop, so coming back from somewhere, one of the Greek islands, they're the ones most likely to be affected. It won't really impact on people's holidays plans.
Okay, I think people would be glad to hear that. If the worst came to the worst, though, what type
and that is worst case.
Okay, what type of routes would be most at risk? Would it be the short-haul European flights, the long-haul services?
As I say, it's the airports that have the problem with fuel supply. It's the airlines have the problem with fuel price, which is a separate issue. But we're well protected from that, because both Ryanair and Aer Lingus have loads of their fuel bought for the year ahead, 80% in the case of Ryanair. Now, if the airports get affected, you ask which airports are more likely to be affected. It's likely to be the smaller ones. It's likely to be the ones on the islands, as I mentioned, the Greek islands. And they're the ones where the airlines will say, okay, we're going to put a fuel stop in. If there's a major fuel supply crisis, the airlines will say, okay, we're going to trim. We're going to take off the midweek flights, which there isn't a bit high demand for. We're going to look at the fat routes, like, for instance, ones that are 4 or 5 flights a day on, and we'll bring it back maybe to 3 instead of 5, or 3 instead of 4. And that's when passengers will get the message saying your 4 o'clock flight has been cancelled, you're on the 6 o'clock flight instead. They won't tend to cut off a destination completely, and the existing bookings will be catered for. It'll be the newer bookings that they won't be accepting anymore that will be most affected.
Okay, so those who have holidays booked this summer don't necessarily need to be worried.
No
but if you're thinking of booking now or in the last week or so, is there anything you need to be cognizant of?
Cognizant of the price. Even though Ryanair have 80% of their fuel, they're still paying double for the last 20%. So that's going to come back on the price of the passenger ticket. And that's where it's really a good idea to jump now. You know, secure that flight. If you've got your accommodation, a lot of people, if you're thinking of something, if you've a wedding or a christening or something to get to, get that flight tied down and make your other arrangement afterwards, because the flight price is only going to go one direction unless this is all solved properly, fairly quickly. And as you know, things change by the day, by the hour, even by the week on the whole Gulf of Hormuz situation.
Even with that, as we discussed with Tommy Corbett and Donegal back on just a short time ago, you know, there's meant to be the renewed round of negotiations. The Tehran hasn't confirmed if its delegation is going to go. The ceasefire is due to end on Wednesday, but it seems like regardless of what happens there, whether this war rumbles on for some time yet, you've highlighted we're getting our fuel from Norway and the US and so on. So will it have, even if, say, the end of this year, there's still an issue with the Straits of Hormuz, that's not likely to greatly impact what happens in terms of aviation in Europe? Not
really in Europe. And one of the things about Europe is it lands unevenly on different markets. Like one of the markets where 25% of the oil comes in from Kuwait is England, Britain. So, you know, they're the airports that are going to be in a little bit more of a quandary than they are in Spain, where they have huge refining capacity, 7 major refineries, and a lot of the oil coming from Venezuela. So all of that, it goes market by market. Where does Ireland stand in that? We don't have a lot of storage capacity. It's not a thing we did. We don't refine jet fuel in Ireland. Whitegate doesn't do it. So we will be dependent on bringing the stuff in from Rotterdam, places like that. And there are some questions being raised, you know, if other refineries in other countries start demanding it. But there's a fail-safe. There's reason to be cheerful there as well. Two of the biggest customers for jet fuel, by a margin, the biggest customer for jet fuel in Europe is Ryanair, and one of the biggest then is IAG, which is the parent of Aer Lingus. So like all these things, when things get a bit squeaky, the people with the buying power can pull rank a little bit. I don't see any reason for concern. Another reason to be cheerful, when you look at the spot price, what people are paying for the forward oil that's due to be delivered in January and February of 2027, it's around $75, which isn't that much more than the bargain basement price that Ryanair paid for it. That means that the markets expect this to be a short-term problem. It also means, you know, when you look at what the share price is doing, what the airlines are saying, they all expect it to be short-term. That said, they also expected it to be over by now. People were saying this war is going to be 6 weeks on February the 28th when it broke out.
Well, I have to say, the sun is shining this morning, Eoghan. You've brought an extra ray of sunshine into people's lives, particularly those who were worried that their summer holiday plans were shattering before their very eyes. So thanks for providing that.
Always a huge pleasure.
Cheers, Eoghan. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll chat to you again. That's Eoghan Corry there, the travel expert and editor of Air and Travel magazine, with some very good news, particularly for those of you out there who were planning to travel abroad this summer, worried about the likelihood of that happening.